I can't reveal that. That was a confidential communication.
Okay, and what is the status of this lawsuit here? This was filed when?
Yes, we filed a lawsuit 2 weeks ago to force the FBI to allow the manuscript to be made public. Again, they had 30 days to approve it, and they've had many months to approve it, and we're asking the courts to order the FBI to follow its own regulations.
What do you know the date?
It was filed 2 weeks ago tomorrow.
Specifically with the question.
I'll take all the questions.
You suggested that the September 11th collection have been funded by money that has been raised by the charity dealing with money paid to go to people with the police force.
In part.
But as I understand it, Osama bin Laden have funded the terrorists to do that. So are these charitable organizations giving their money to Osama bin Laden?
That needs to be investigated, and that's what was in fact hampered from being investigated. It's not in dispute that monies were raised and laundered by Islamic charities in the United States, some of them tied with Saudi Arabia and Osama bin Laden, for use against Americans and others in terrorist acts. That's not in dispute. In fact, it was Judicial Watch who filed the first complaint against the Islamic charities. You can find it on our website at judicialwatch.org with the Internal Revenue Service, who spent the last 8 years investigating critics of the Clinton administration but would not audit these Islamic charities. Now, after Judicial Watch made an issue of this, and after Special Agent Wright and others issued meager press releases and the press got onto it, finally the Bush administration got around to seizing some of the assets of these charities, both in Texas, in the Midwest, and most recently in Herndon, Virginia. But it's not in dispute.
And it's no coincidence that initially the finance aspects of the investigations were run out of the Chicago office of the FBI. Special Agent Wright and his colleagues there had laid the groundwork for what now the administration is attempting to do in going after the financing, and he's been kept out of the loop on that.
He was demoted in and around the time period leading up to 9/11 when he was requesting clearance for his book. When he requested clearance for his book, he was yanked off of the terrorism investigations and basically reduced to chief cook and bottle washer of the FBI.
What has happened to the Muslim FBI agent who refused to wear a wire and stated that a Muslim does not report another Muslim? Are these words and actions consistent with FBI policy, religious accommodation laws, and any oaths or agreements that an FBI employee would make?
To the best of our knowledge, nothing has happened to that agent. Special Agent Wright and others requested action. Nothing was taken. And with regard to your second question, if that was the standard of whether one investigates as an FBI agent, then I guess the Jewish agents wouldn't have caught Jonathan Pollard, which they did.
Did he report him saying that, or just he saying that? Did he report was he wired?
There were several witnesses to that statement.
Agent Rowley. With respect specifically to the thwarted request from the Tampa office, and because of the refusal to wear the wire, what were the specific consequences of that? What was lost? What evidence? What part of the?
Yeah,
we must be able to do something about it.
We can't get into what was or was not obtained by that, but obviously when the FBI conducts an investigation, it's doing it with the eye on prosecution, and it needs evidence for that prosecution. And one way that they get that evidence is through wiring people. And one way that you get people to talk is to have agents who are wired or individuals who are wired that target feels comfortable with. So if you can't get somebody that the target will talk with, you can't get the evidence, and you can't then likely bring a successful prosecution.
Is there some way to perhaps talk about that aspect of the case in at least a circumspect way? I mean, there was a case in Tampa.
That's as far as we can go. Yeah, the reason we went that far is because we actually had a document that was released under the Freedom of Information Act, which set forth the parameters of what Mr. Fitton just read to you. We have to do that because we're representing Bob Wright. These people mean business, and unless you play this story up big, and I hope you do, Special Agent Wright is going to wind up behind the 8 ball, and Special Agent Raleigh is going to wind up becoming Assistant FBI Director.
How is it claimed to tell part of the story, but not the whole story? Well, none of the story.
It's courageous to come forward with the mentality in Washington, D.C. these days where any whistleblower is retaliated against. And let me tell you a little story about, we represent a number of whistleblowers, from people who blew the whistle on UN corruption to individuals who blew the whistle on the Los Alamos Compromise. We have a lawsuit against Louis Freeh, former FBI director, which the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals has upheld. That's going forward against Louis Freeh. And let me tell you what they did to Trulock. They seized his computer. These are FBI agents at the direction of Louis Freeh, broke into his house, hit his dog over the head with a gun butt. Thank God he didn't have any children in there at the time. These are the way these people respond. So yes, Agent Wright is courageous, and Agent Wright prays, and I pray for him, that nothing happens to him.
When does the letter come out?
As soon as the FBI will clear it. It doesn't have publisher yet.
If you get a subpoena from a member of Congress or from a congressional committee, would that free him up? Would that override the FBI regulations? Would he then be free to talk at least to that committee, if not to the public?
Technically it wouldn't, but I assure you that the FBI would throw the towel in as quickly as Director Mueller became a believer in Colleen Raleigh.
I'm confused by the need for a subpoena. The letter that you read, the threatening letter that you read, indicated the places that he could go, including the Inspector General. I seem to recall that it also listed the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, which is where Agent Raleigh sent her information.
That's a good question. That is a new thing that they added into this letter. If you read the letters, you'll see they never before mentioned Congress. This is the first time.
But my question is, I mean, Agent Raleigh didn't hold a news conference. She sent her information to the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, which are enabled to receive classified information. What I'm wondering is why Agent Wright hasn't sent his information to those committees.
Actually, that's something I can't get into, but shall we say that Judicial Watch and Agent Wright are thorough? They don't leave any rock unturned. So we've been working on this for months, and you can be assured that there are people in Congress who haven't done their job either. Over here. Congress's newfound interest is just that as well. The hypocrisy of Congress equals that of the Bush administration.
Did you come across anything that might have pointed to September 11th? For instance, any of the hijackers, any sort of plot that there was an act of terrorism?
Well, you can see this one individual. What's the name? Khadib. He obviously was implicated in and around Osama bin Laden, and the American government is investigating to see whether or not he had any role in September 11th. But he was into people like that, you see, that were involved in the money laundering, who may have links to bin Laden, who may have, of course we know he did, stand behind the tragedy at the World Trade Center. The FBI became a recent believer in doing that. Wright was urging them to proceed criminally against these organizations. They did not do so until Judicial Watch and others raised a public outcry as to why Islamic money laundering in the United States was not being dealt with. This is a new phenomenon. And part of the reason for this phenomenon, I believe, as Chairman of General Counsel of Judicial Watch, is because these monies were going through some very powerful U.S. banks with some very powerful interests in the United States. These banks knew or had reason to know that these monies were laundered by terrorists. And there are very significant potential conflicts of interest in both the Clinton and Bush administration, with the country primarily responsible for funding these charities, namely Saudi Arabia. We have both Clinton and Bush, and in particular this Bush administration, who is as tight with Saudi Arabia as you can get. The President's father used to stay with the bin Laden family when he would go to Saudi Arabia. So I don't know. I don't know what the exact answer is, but that may help explain why the why the FBI agents were nervous about getting into this stuff when the rich and part of the reason for this phenomenon, I believe, as Chairman of General Counsel of Judicial Watch, is because these monies were going through some very powerful U.S. banks with some very powerful interests in the United States. These banks knew or had reason to know that these monies were laundered by terrorists. And there are very significant potential conflicts of interest in both the Clinton and Bush administration, with the country primarily responsible for funding these charities, namely Saudi Arabia. We have both Clinton and Bush, and in particular this Bush administration, who is as tight with Saudi Arabia as you can get. The President's father used to stay with the bin Laden family when he would go to Saudi Arabia. So I don't know. I don't know what the exact answer is, but That may help explain why the why the FBI agents were nervous about getting into this stuff when the rich and powerful of Washington, D.C. are in fact doing business with some of these entities.
Larry,